Hey, how you getting on? Today on Things I'd Rather Spend Money On Than New and Intact Clothing, I revisit the first tube amp I ever had, the Peavey Valveking. I don't know what everybody's on about. This hoodie's barely broken in. Anyway, the Peavey Valveking. As I just mentioned, this was the first tube amp I ever bought. I bought one of these brand new from Toolman all the way back in 2010, but I never really bonded with it. It never clicked, and I sold it a few years later. But I've been very interested in revisiting this amplifier. So I've been looking for a good deal on one for a couple of months now. And in November, December, one of these popped up just 3-4 minutes drive away from my house. And I got this for 130 euros, which is nothing. That's less than a pedal, and not even a boutique pedal. And the reason why I've wanted to revisit this amplifier so much is because a bunch of my friends, acquaintances, and peers have been making videos on these amps, and they've got pretty decent results. I think Kyle Bull just had a video recently where he featured a Valveking for the second time. I think it was a video about underrated amplifiers that you could get good deals on. Taylor Danley has a video on the Peavey Valveking as well, got decent results, and Glenn Fricker has been speaking highly of the Valveking as well. And each time I've just been sitting there and thinking, that's interesting, because I remember this amplifier being rather meh. Never really loved it that much. But I'm pretty sure a lot of that could be down to user error, and I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. But before I bore you with all the details, here's the plan. I'm going to do a regular amp demo I do with my amps, so I'm going to check the channels and functions, dial the amps a bit, see what tones I can get out of it, and I'm going to shoot it out against the Peavey 5150 here. We're going to do some switching with the KHE amps, which is behind me, to see how they compare with each other, if the Valveking can actually hang with the 5150. So since I got this amplifier, I've been studying the schematic more than I've been playing it. I've only played this 2-3 times just to make sure that it actually works. And I've studied the schematic because I think a lot of my troubles or my dissatisfaction with the amplifier is down to user error. Because in 2010, I was 21, I was about to become a student, didn't have much money, and I wouldn't have known good tone if it had punched me in the plums. I've since learned a lot more about the intricacies of this amplifier, and I've looked at the schematic to actually understand how these little quirks actually work. It's an interesting design. There's some really cool features in this, and we're going to be looking at the parts of the schematic as well. So this is going to be a nerdy video. And that reminds me, there's timestamps in the description down below for you to skip to the playthrough or the shootout section, or maybe a look inside the amplifier, whichever you like, because I'm going to bore you guys with my personal story about the Valveking now and why I think it's user error. Because back in the day, I was really tone deaf. I didn't know how to dial an amplifier. I didn't know anything about speakers or cabinets and their importance. I certainly didn't know what the difference between a Class A and a Class AB amplifier was. That's relevant because the patent applied for a texture knob on the back kind of allows you to dial this power amp response to, or the power amp to respond like a Class A power amp, as Peavey state in their manual, but I wouldn't have known what any of that meant back in the day. I was using a Fender Frontman FM212 combo solid state amplifier before that, with a metal zone going in front of it. And listening to old recordings, I didn't even know how to dial that metal zone. And back then, there wasn't much information to be had. YouTube, as it is today, wasn't really a thing. This was still a few years before Wrist, Beards and Gear and Ola England really started doing what they're doing. So really, I had nothing to go by. I didn't know forums or anything like that either. It was just trial and error, and my ears weren't very well developed back then, but still everybody was hyped up about tube amps, and this was about the cheapest tube amp you can get. I got it and I didn't really gel with the distorted sounds, so I continued using said metal zone into the clean channel of this amplifier. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, my friends were just as tone deaf as myself, and the other guitarist got the same rig, Peavey Valveking with a metal zone going into the front. And for years we wondered why on live shows or in live shows, our guitar sounds just sounded like white noise. We used to blame the sound guys. So my apologies to every sound guy that ever met us. But still, we were happy with that. We were happy playing our cans of bees until one day, this absolute bastard bought a used Peavey 6505 and just blew me away. I had no chance. So I looked into other amps I might be able to afford that might be able to hang with the 5150. So I got my Laney Ironheart, and shortly after that, I sold my Peavey Valveking. So as I said, I knew nothing about dial-in amps. I'm not sure if I used front-end boosts already at that stage. I'm pretty sure I didn't know about the patching the effects loop trick. And knowing myself and dials and not being able to hear what they do, I probably left the texture knob right in the middle because I didn't know what it did. And that can't have been very conducive to a good tone. Fast forward 16 years, and I'm still an idiot, but I know I'm an idiot now, and that puts me ahead. I know about speakers now. I know vaguely how to mic them. I know vaguely how to dial amplifiers, so I'm very curious about trying this out again. So I'm going to get a guitar. We're going to demo this amplifier as I usually do. Check out the 2 channels, clean lead, twist some knobs, see what kind of tones we can get out of that, and then compare it to the 5150 before we crack the amp open and take a look at the insides of it. Righto, I'm not sure if I just mentioned that, but I'm using my Mesa OS from 2003. It's got 2003 vintage 30s in it with an SM57 on the sweet spot. Even though the amp is on this Marshall cab, I'm not sure if I'm going to use the Marshall cab in this video. It's got a V30 and 8 ohms as well from the year 2000 in it, also with an SM57. Using my Henry's Boa Snake Pink Relic, or Snake Boa Pink ST1 anyway, and drop D. Later on, I'm switching to this beautiful Balaguer Espada in drop A sharp, I think, I'm not sure, very low anyway. That's with my Lichtlem Audio King in yellow, boosting the amp. Without it, it sounds like... Not too shabby, not too bad for 130 euros, and that's not even the highest gain it can do. We still have a little bit left on the pot here, and there's a gain boost, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start off with the layout. This amplifier has 2 inputs, one high gain input and a low gain input. The high gain input has higher impedance, so the resistance to ground is larger, which means more signal will get through to the gain stage. The second input is attenuated. It has a pad of 6 dB, I think. It uses the same mechanism as the old 2204, 2203 JCM 800s and the Marshall Plexis. The clean channel only has a 3-band EQ and a volume knob, no gain knob, so quite similar to the clean channel on the Peavey 3120, which I like an awful lot. The only other control on there is a bright switch, which is out at the moment. The lead channel has a gain knob, 3-band EQ and a volume, as well as 2 switchable buttons, a volume boost, and it has a gain button, which has interesting circuitry to it. We'll get to that later. There is a master knob for the reverb, which is a spring reverb actually. So most reverbs you will get in amps these days are digital, with some exceptions like the Orange Rockaverb series, but this is obviously much more affordable, or was much more affordable back in the day as well. There is an effects loop. I'm going to take this cable out here, because we're going to look at that a little later. And interesting enough, the effects loop is on the front of this amplifier, and I think more amplifiers should have the effects loop on the front, because I remember being quite annoyed having to dick around the back of the panels when setting up for shows. Which one is the send, which one is the return jack? I like that. Also, this would be cool for using external preamps, so I think that might be something I'd be keeping this amp for, to test preamps in the future. Then we have damping, the power amp controls, presence and resonance, very similar to the controls we have on a Peavey 5150 or 6505. Standby power switches, pilot light, nothing out of the ordinary there. The back has a foot switch connection, 2 speaker jacks, as well as the texture knob, which is another very interesting part of the circuitry of this amplifier. But let's check out the clean channel first. The texture knob is fully clockwise, which means it's in normal mode, which is class A/B operation. And we're in the high gain input. The clean channel sounds like this. That sounds crystal clean to me. No idea what you'd need the low input for. It's just more quiet. Let's go back into the high gain input, see if we can. Really no crunch to be gotten out of this. This is medium output humbucker, but I don't think you could get much out of that with a high output humbucker either. Let's check out the bright switch. And that is pretty drastic. That might be the most aggressive bright switch on any amp I've experienced so far. Definitely not for the single coils. It's something I'd only use on a very dark neck humbucker, I think. While we're on the clean channel, let's dial up the reverb. Botched the riff there a bit, but the reverb is really tasteful. It doesn't really get to obnoxious levels like some other amps. It's tasteful. I think that concludes the clean channel. Let's switch over to the lead channel using this button. Pretty high right now. Let's dial that. So it does nice crunchy sounds. Let's check out the low input on that. That's borderline clean, but I really don't see why you'd need that lower gain input on this amp at all. Kind of low crunch. Let's see what happens if we dial that up a bit. Perfectly acceptable crunch tones. Let's check out the volume boost button just for the sake of completion. I'm an idiot. I had it in the whole time. It's subtle. It'll probably not come across over YouTube, but anyway, I'm just going to leave it in because louder is better. So that's with the gain on the lead channel pretty high, but it's still not really modern metal territory. Let's max this. Now with the gain on max, it's still not modern metal territory. Let's add a boost. So this is the gain on max with the same boost in front as I used in the intro or at the beginning there. But you'll notice it's still not as tight, and that's where the effects loop trick comes in play. You can do a little trick on this amplifier where you just take a patch cable and you pop it into the effects loop to bridge the effects loop. And it boosts the signal slightly. And the effect of this little trick is quite drastic, at least to me in the room right now. The amp gets louder, tighter, clearer. It just sounds more pleasant and modern to me. And I was wondering if this trick was a myth, but obviously it's not, and there's good reason for it. What you're seeing now is part of the Peavey Valveking schematic. We're looking at the preamp in particular now. You can see here are our input jacks J101 and J102, and the signal gets routed through various resistors, capacitors, tube gain stages, relay contacts, and all of that jazz, all the way to here where the effects loop sits. After the effects loop, the signal gets routed onto the power amp, which is on the next page of this document. And relevant for this part of the video is this section in particular here, around the effects loop. These are the send and return jacks, and these are switching jacks, meaning they open contacts when cables are inserted. And responsible for the increase in level and the change in sound is this transistor here. What this is a buffer. And I assume Peavey put this component here because they probably correctly assumed that people would be using long cable runs, several different pedals, which causes the signal level to drop or the signal to degrade. So in anticipation of that, they probably put this buffer here. But that also means that when you just bridge the effects loop, you don't lose any signal level and you profit from a boost in signal level instead. So when there's no cables inserted, the signal either comes from this relay contact here, which is used to switch between the two channels, or from the reverb return here, and flows through this resistor, through the switching contacts of the return jack to this capacitor here, and is then routed further on to the power amp. At the same time, when we look at how the signal is routed from the emitter of the transistor, that gets routed to the switching contacts of the send jack, which are just closed, so that signal doesn't go anywhere. But as soon as you stick in a cable here, this contact opens and this contact opens. So the signal doesn't flow through here anymore, but it flows to the send cable, or the cable in the send jack, to the return, to the power amp. Sounds quite pleasant if you ask me, so this trick works. put the boost off, turn the boost on. And that sounds pretty cool to me. But there's still more that this amp has to give. There is a gain button here. If we switch that in, that's without a boost pedal if we add a front end boost. And that is quite high gain, but it also adds a slight fizziness, slight harshness, and I was wondering what this button does. And again, I took a look at the schematic. Okay, we're looking at the gain boost circuitry now, and I'll be honest with you, this took me the longest to understand, and I'm not 100% sure that I understand it 100% correctly. So if somebody knows better or understands this schematic better than I do, please leave a comment down below and educate me. I'm just figuring this out as I'm going. So what's going on here? The gain boost circuit is pretty much the stuff that goes along here. And when I first looked at this, I thought this arrangement here with the two diodes, the one N40, 148s, that reminds me a bit of the clipping circuit in a tube screamer. But upon closer inspection, it doesn't do that at all. These are not clipping diodes. They're not really part of the audio signal as such. What this is a gating circuit, and it's very similar to the gate circuit from the Peavey JSX, which is not really a gate as such. It just filters out some noise. What this does in conjunction with the 1 meg resistor here, it means that very low level signals are just muted. They don't pass through to the next stage, which is down here, V2B. But as soon as the signal level goes over 0.6 volts, I think, then effectively these diodes start conducting and the 1 meg resistor is bypassed and the signal passes through to V2B. What the gain boost circuit is, I believe, is the part between the cathode of V1B and the plate of V2A here. And I believe the gain boost switches this little JFET transistor here. When the gain boost isn't switched, this transistor is open and part of the signal coming out of the plate of V2B is fed back to the cathode of V1B. And I believe that is a feedback circuit, but not classic negative feedback as we know it from the power amp, where the signal gets fed back to the grid. What this feedback loop to the cathode does is, I believe it lowers gain a bit because it influences the cathode to grid voltage, so may affect the bias of this tube slightly. I did a little research on that, and what this supposedly does is it makes the stage a little more linear, but it reduces gain. However, if you activate the gain boost, this transistor closes and the feedback loop is effectively shunted to ground. So that goes away and this stage amplifies harder. That's increased by the fact that this capacitor here is also fed to ground, which makes it a cathode bypass capacitor, yes, which should take some high and mid frequencies out of the feedback loop of the cathode itself, so it boosts those frequencies. That's why the amp also becomes brighter when you engage the boost switch. As it is for now, before I've done anything to this amp, I slightly prefer the tone of it without the gain boost engaged, but with a front end boost. But let's see how the gain boost affects the tone when the gain is dialed a little back. Add the front end boost. Still, I just prefer the gain boost out and the gain pretty much maxed on the lead channel with the front end boost. I think that's how this amp, as it is right now, sounds best. Let's see how the amp handles lower tuners. I got this beautiful Gallagher guitar and a Spada from their 10th anniversary run with a 27-inch scale length, and it's tuned to drop A, and it sounds like this with the amp set as it is. This guitar is so much fun. The boost is engaged. Let's see if that reacts the same way to the gain boost. Didn't hear it as much at first, but it's still there. That fizziness, that harshness. I still prefer this with the gain boost off. It definitely needs a front end boost to help it. I love this guitar. Anyway, let's switch back to the Henrys for the time being, because I want to talk about the texture control. And I think that might have been the aspect of the amp that really threw me when I was younger and far more ignorant, because I probably just set it in the middle, and that probably wasn't a good idea. All right, we're looking at the power amp now, and what we can see here is our 4 6L6s, the last 12 AX7 in the circuit, and here is the circuit for the texture knob, which is its own breakaway board in the schematic and probably on the inside of the amp as well. Now, as I may have said, I believed for the longest time that this is probably just some frequency filter in the power amp, but it really does do what Peavey say it does in the manual. But first of all, I want to look at the phase inverter, because this is not the type of phase inverter you'd usually see in modern high gain amps, which is in most cases a long tail pair, where two halves of a 12 AX7 are linked together through their cathodes. One side gets the guitar signal to its grid, the other grid is held at a stable DC voltage, I think, which causes that half of the 12AX7 to let a signal out of its plate that is a 180 degrees out of phase to the other half of the 12AX7. This here looks entirely different. The first half of this 12AX7 is used pretty much as a regular gain stage, and then that plate output is fed into the grid here, and we have a signal being tapped from the cathode and one being from the plate. Now, I learned that this is a cathode ion phase inverter, and supposedly Orange and Ampeg use these a lot, or used to anyway. The modern oranges I looked up, like the Rockerverb and I think the 80-140, they use the long tail pair, much like pretty much everything else, like Marshalls, like Engels, and other Peaveys like the 5150, 6505. Now, both types of phase inverters have their pros and cons that I'm not going to go into in this video, partially because I'm not 100% sure what I know is accurate, but that's beside the point. What this does is it gives out a very balanced signal. So the signal that comes out of the cathode and the signal that comes out of the plate, assuming the loads are equal, they're very much the same. They're very well balanced. So what the texture circuit does is it takes the signal that's coming out of the cathode of the cathodine phase inverter, and it either routes that through to the grids of the V6 and V4 power tubes, as it should in regular class AB operation, or through the potentiometer, the VR11 1 meg potentiometer, shunts that signal to ground variably. So what that does is it kind of makes the power amp behave class A-ish. Now, it doesn't really meet the strict definition from the RCA handbook, and I'm not going to go into that, partly because I've botched trying to explain that several times at this point. I'm just going to link you guys to an article on aikenamps.com where he explains the definition and what makes a class A, what makes it class AB, and whatnot, and what the differences are. He explains that far better than I ever could. Anyway, what this means, though, is that this side, with the knob fully counterclockwise, so in class A mode, only pulls quiescent current. Any signal that arrives off the grids there is negligible, which means that this side is doing all the work, which makes the power amp loaded asymmetrically, as is the output transformer. Kind of interesting. It also should slightly change the bias of this stage, so it will slightly affect the signal that comes out of the plate of the cathodine PI. And I think that is also the reason why they chose this particular design, because I think a long tail pair probably couldn't do that. I believe that might be unstable, but again, I'm not 100% sure about that. If you know about these circuits better than I, please enlighten me in the comments down below, enlighten me and the rest of us, because I think this is cool. John Fields, here, that's the engineer. Cool job. This is nifty. I like it. It's nothing I'd personally use. I really don't have a use case for that, but I love the creativity. This is in full class AB mode, so regular, power amp as it is. I'm going to turn the texture knob all the way to the left, which is class A mode. I'm going to turn it back to class AB like mode as I riff it. And you can see that, or you hopefully be able to hear that in the class A mode, the level goes down a bit and the tone of the amp changes a lot. It gets a little darker and warmer. So that's probably cool for these overdriven tones, but not really what we're after when we want to dial a metal tone, or a modern metal tone for that matter. And knowing my idiot 20-year-old self, I probably just had this knob in the middle position because that's where it felt safe to me, which sounds like this. I should have had it here. Add a boost to them. And that's a perfectly usable tone. I'm enjoying this, in fact. This is a good tone. Okay, let's do one more thing before we compare it to the Peavey 5150, which is loop a riff and the EQ bit. I'm going to turn off the boost for that. All right, shootout time. Peavey Valveking versus Peavey 5150 script up there, which is set the way I usually play it, the way I like it. First without a boost. The 5150 has more authority, that's for sure. It's kind of thicker and ballsier, but the Valveking is not as far away from it as I expected. I'm very surprised, actually. Let's add a boost. So with the boost in front, the 5150 definitely wins. It's the more aggressive, the more it's the more aggressive sounding amp. It's the thicker sounding amp. It's the better sounding amp to my ears. But the Valveking doesn't sound terrible. It's absolutely usable. I mean, but the Valveking is not bad sounding in contrast. It's very usable, more than usable. I think it sounds good. Let's add the gain boost just to see. The gain boost adds that harshness back in, but honestly, if we could tweak that a bit, it could get pretty close. I'm very surprised. I thought the 5150 would absolutely crush the Valveking, but the Valveking holds its own. I mean, the 5150 definitely wins, at least to my ears. But for 130 euros, I can't complain. This is sick. I'm happy. It was a good purchase. I don't think there's much point in comparing these any further. I'm going to power them off, and then we're going to take the Valveking out of its head shell and take a quick look at that. Okay, I got the amp out of the head shell, and it is disgustingly dusty. I'm going to have to give this a good clean before I put it back in the head shell. Really weird how the chassis is fastened in there. These are the longest chassis bolts I've ever seen because the nuts sit on the top side here rather than on a lip on the side. And the other thing is there's a lip at the back here which had screws in it. I was tugging and pulling at the chassis like crazy without actually noticing this lip back here, which had 4 additional screws bolting it to the chassis, to the head shell. So I very much believe these are the original tubes, as they are rubies and the writing is looking very pale on them. So I'm not sure how much life is still left in these. Thing is, this amp has a non-adjustable fixed bias, and that really put me in a tailspin back in the day because mine developed issues with the power tubes and I needed to change them. And at that stage, I was terrified to pull the chassis. I just thought the electrons were going to jump out the chassis and stab me in the neck. Of course, you know, you can't be too careful with tube amps that hold lethal voltages still. It's not that dangerous. I put new tubes in and it worked, so I suspect they're okay. This is actually really, really neat. I'm surprised. I mean, we have the typical Molex connectors that we have on Peavey amplifiers, but there's loads of space in here. Those are the filter caps. They look decent from what I can tell. Everything's labeled nice and clean. This is nice. This looks cool. I hope this focuses. I hope you can see that. We have a breakaway board for the power section here, a main board. This is a breakaway board for the power supply. And according to the schematic, we should have a breakaway board for presence and resonance, as well as a breakaway board for the texture control, which I'm not seeing. Oh, here's the little breakaway board for the texture. That's just up here. It's a tiny little board with a resistor and a capacitor on it. It's fairly easy to modify these to have adjustable bias. All we need to do is remove one of the resistors. I think it's R205, which is a 39K resistor. We can just, replace that with a resistor with a smaller value in series with a potentiometer. The potentiometer would be the adjustable bias then, and the resistor in series would just be a safety resistor in case our pot fails, that it wouldn't go, the power tubes don't risk going to thermal runaway as much anyway. They might be biased too hot, but they won't make the amp melt down. This is cool. Frank Schlossmacher Audio and Video Technik. There's a stamp in here, so somebody has serviced this amp in the past. That's good. This is a neat amplifier. This would be easy to work on, and this would be fairly easy to mod, I think. So that's the question. What do I do with this amp? Do I just keep it for future reference? Do I use it for, preamp tests because it has a decent power amp, 100 watt tube power amp, which is accessible through the effects loop on the front? Yeah, or do I mod this? Let me know what you think in the comments. So this is the end of my video on the Peavey Valveking, and the conclusion I've reached is I've been completely wrong about this amp whatsoever. Either my one back in the day had something wrong with it, or I was just too stupid to use it. I'd like to believe the former, just to protect my ego a bit, but I think it was the latter. I probably had no idea what I was doing because I didn't know what Class A and Class AB meant. I probably had the texture in the middle. I didn't know the effects loop trick, and I'm not sure if I knew front-end boost, because if you do that, if you keep it in Class AB, if you bridge the effects loop, and if you have a good front-end boost in front, you're good to go. I mean, it sounded awesome. Of course, it's not as good as a 5150. A 5150 will sound better. Come on, let's be serious. At the same time, did the 5150 destroy the Valveking? Not really, not at all. And I mean, for the price they went new back in the day, and for the price you can get them these days, no brainer. Great amp. I think I'll be keeping it. I'll be doing some stuff with it. Either I'll mod it, or I'll use it as a preamp platform, or just play with it. Let me know what you think about this new format in the comments. Do you like the more nerdy excursions into the circuit diagrams? Let me know. If you think they're stupid, I'll stop. I think they're cool. I like looking at circuit diagrams and figuring out how things work. Yeah, let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.